Hello there, thrill seekers. So, the other day I put up what do you call those things? A meme, I guess is what the kids call them these days, on Instagram. And it's a quote from Jiddu Krishnamurti, and it goes like this: "When I say I must control my thought, the controller is the creation of thought. So thought controls thought, and it has no meaning." And at least two people who saw that commented on it saying that they didn't understand that. And I thought, okay, let me see what I can say about that. It's a topic I have talked about on this video channel before, and I remember referencing a book called Thoughts Without a Thinker, which I said at the time, and I'll say it again, I've never read. But I like the title of the book. I don't know what the book is about. Maybe I should get a copy of it and see. But so far I haven't got a copy of the book, so I don't know what it says inside. But the basic idea of thoughts without a thinker is a kind of a core Buddhist idea that you kind of live with as you practice. And my own experience of it was like this. I can recall a time, who knows, 20 odd years ago, I was in Tokyo doing my job and whatever I was doing, and it occurred to me that all of my thoughts are just thoughts. That's the words that I would place around this experience. And if I say it like that, it just sounds like, oh, I had a thought that all my thoughts are just thoughts. Oh yeah, that's no big deal. But at the time it was a huge deal because I had not noticed that before. I had heard it before from books. Probably I'd read it in Krishnamurti's writings. I'd probably read it in Buddhist writings. My teachers had probably said it to me. But up until that moment, the real understanding of thoughts are just thoughts had not dawned on me. And it wasn't a thought. When I express it in words, that's a thought expressing itself. But that's not what this was. This was like a clear understanding, like as if it was just sitting there in front of me, going, "Here I am. Thoughts are just thoughts." The English language forces you to postulate a thing that thinks thoughts. So when I say I think of a pink elephant, then there's the I who thinks. And even in Japanese, you say to omo. So the omo means to think, and to is kind of an attribution. And even though you don't have to say watashi wa so to omo, I think so, you can just say so to omo without saying watashi, without saying I. The watashi is I. It's still putting that to in front of it, in front of the word omo, implies that there's somebody doing the thinking. So even in Japanese, you're forced to postulate this entity that thinks. And it may be a universal thing. I don't know, maybe there's some language out there, and maybe some commenter can tell me there's some language out there which doesn't attribute thought to a thinker. But generally speaking, we attribute thought to a thinker. So you imagine, you and I and everybody else imagines that there is some entity inside me, or there is a me that does the thinking. If you do Zazen practice for long enough, gosh, there's all kinds of noises today. There's some kind of truck beeping up there, which I think is a repair truck, and then there's helicopters going overhead. Okay, so I cut out some of the helicopter noise for you, but there you go. It's just, I'm sorry about that. If I waited for all this noise to stop, I would never get a video done, so I apologize for all that stuff. But anyway, we postulate that there is someone inside there thinking, and if you do Zazen for long enough, that starts to dissolve. I think for most people it starts to dissolve, but it takes a long time. I must have done Zazen for 10 years by the time it really dissolved for me. This idea that there is an entity producing thoughts. But if you kind of think about it logically, you can get a few steps towards this idea, I think, see? Which is, just look at your thoughts and try to find the entity who is thinking the thoughts. And it becomes kind of absurd. It becomes this kind of absurd circle of absurdity in which you are imagining that there is something which doesn't think that produces thoughts. At least that's the only way I can conceive of it. Like there's some silent producer of thoughts that produces thoughts that have sound, not exactly sound like that annoying beeping that the truck is doing up there, but more of a kind of a mental sound, a mental taste. Good Lord. I stopped the video there because the beeping got super loud, but it was a good thing that I did so. So sometimes the things that you think are bad turn out to be good, and here's an example of that. Because after I stopped the video, I remembered something that's very relevant to this topic. I came across this thing in a book called Prior to Consciousness, Talks with Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, who I've mentioned before. He's not a Zen teacher, he was an Advaita Vedanta teacher, so it's a different tradition. But he goes into something in this book that I think is relevant to the topic we're talking about. And I don't know of any similar formula you would find in Zen. The thing about Zen is you don't really get formulas like this in Zen. It tends to be they like to try to teach things very directly without explaining them very much. And in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, they'll explain things. Also, I would imagine you could find a similar formula in Yogacara Buddhism, but I don't know the Yogacara formula, so I'm going to give you the Advaita Vedanta formula that I got out of this book, because I think it's interesting. So let me just read you the passage. Now, this is talking about speech, but speech is kind of the outflow of thought. Speech is sort of the audible outflow of thought, so it kind of goes into thought. So let's just read it. The questioner asks, what are the 4 types of speech? And Nisargadatta Maharaj says, they are para, source consciousness, then pashyanti, the emanation of thoughts, then madhyama, formulation of thought words, and vaikari, language explodes out. The ordinary ignorant person is not aware of para and pashyanti, that is, source consciousness and the emanation of thoughts, which starts the whole process. They are too subtle. He starts working on madhyama, which they translate as formulation of thought words, which is also identified with the mind and comes out with words, vaikari. The mind throws out words and thoughts, and through these we have mistaken our identity as me or mine, whereas whatever takes place is independent of the one who witnesses and is based entirely on the life force. This consciousness has mistakenly identified itself with the body and with thoughts or words. It considers itself to be guilty of something, or that it has acquired merit by some action, whereas everything merely takes place through the action of the life force. The one who understands this vital breath, the life force, is beyond all mental concepts. The one who has not understood it is a slave to his thoughts. So that's an interesting way to put it. In my less formulaic sort of way of putting it, what I've seen through the process of Zazen is that as you kind of when you first started, thoughts are you're just thinking thoughts like you always do, and there's just chattering going on, which I guess would be in this formulation, that madhyama, formulation of thought words. But as you kind of look at it, or as I've kind of looked at it myself, that goes deeper, and you start to see that there are thoughts that exist in forms that don't have words attached to them yet. They're just sort of general feelings, or a kind of a sense of something, which then somehow gets words put onto it, usually in terms of trying to express it to someone else, even when that someone else you're expressing it to is yourself. Often you are, or I am, let's say, I'm not going to try to accuse you of anything, I am imagining a conversation with somebody, even if the person who I'm going to have this conversation with is kind of a nebulous, almost nothing. Sometimes it's a specific person, that I want to say this to later, after I formulate these thoughts into words. But there's that sense that I must put this together in some sort of words in order to communicate them either to myself or to somebody else. And that's that, I would identify that as that madhyama. I guess madhyama means middle. I don't know much Sanskrit, but I think that's what that means, thought. But before that is Pashyanti, the emanation of thoughts. So that's what I would say I was getting at when I was doing Zazen and seeing this Pashyanti, this emanation of thoughts, that there is the thought just sort of starts to form. I imagine it like a lava lamp. Have you ever seen a lava lamp? The bubbles kind of come up and bloop out, and then the bloop out of the bubble is the thought. Anyhow, and then below that, source consciousness. So source consciousness is doesn't have any sort of taste or anything. It's very open. And that would be more like what is actually witnessing the thoughts. So Krishnamurti's saying that I started this whole mess with is, I say I must control my thought. The controller is the creation of thought. So often, especially in Zen practice, you find yourself trying to control thought. I remember some guy on the internet when I first started doing a blog like a billion years ago, was on in the comments section saying, have you ever tried thought stoppage? And I thought about that for a second, and I thought, okay, yeah, you can do that. You can do thought stoppage. You can go, there, I just did it. You didn't notice anything. But I sort of went into this thing where I just suppressed any sort of expression of thought in my mind. So I refused to allow any of the thoughts that were bubbling up to have words attached to them. And I guess that's maybe what people call thought stoppage. But that's still the creation of thought. That's thought controlling thought. And when you have thought controlling thought, you're not really getting out of the mess that you're in. It's still the mess of thought. It's just thought creating thought, or thought trying to suppress thought, and that it's still just another thought, and that is difficult to see, because you can kind of, if you want to, I would imagine, carry that on a long way. Like if I did that thought stoppage for a long time, like I've never done it, but I would imagine from the feeling I get from doing it from a short time, that if I could do it for half an hour or an hour or something, it might feel like, wow, it might be this, mind-blowing experience, but it would still be just another thought controlling a thought. It's like trying to hold on. What we do in the Zen practice is we just let the thoughts go, and we don't even identify them with a thinker. You don't identify the thought as being me anymore. The thing that happens when you do that, just a little warning for you in case you decide to try it at home, is that at first it can be a little scary, because a lot of what you are doing is kind of, we don't notice that we're doing this. We're kind of picking and choosing thoughts. We're kind of going, okay, this one's good, this one's bad, this one's good, this one's bad, this one's me, this one's not me. And thoughts are coming around, rapid fire, and you are doing this unconsciously. At least this is what I saw myself doing until I started, becoming aware of it. Just going, this one's good, this one's bad. If you start letting them go, the thoughts that are the bad thoughts, the thoughts that you don't think you would ever think, start to come through. And that can be difficult. A violent thought, a racist thought, all these thoughts that you don't think are part of you, they'll come up, and they don't mean anything. If you suddenly have a violent thought or a racist thought or whatever thought that you don't think is very good, doesn't mean anything. It just means that somewhere in your mind you heard somebody say something like that, and it stuck there, and it kind of bloops out a little bit, or maybe it's something you ate that, your stomach gives you a little pain, and that pain gets translated into a thought, and that thought gets translated into something, unsavory. Doesn't matter. But when one first starts to notice this, you can start attributing self to those thoughts and go, oh my God, I can't believe I thought that. Don't worry about it. Just keep letting them go. Don't attach anything to them. Especially the unsavory ones. Definitely don't attach a sort of like I'm thinking that, that is me kind of thing to those thoughts. And the trick is you have to stop doing that even with the good ones, even with the ones you like. You have to stop going that is me. Just kind of let all of them go, and eventually it starts to become clear, I think, for most people, for myself, that there is no me in there thinking these thoughts. They're just kind of going. They're just kind of going, and there is maybe a sense of, in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, they like to call it the witness. In Zen, we don't use that term, so I'm a little reluctant to use it, but, I've already used it, so the cat's out of the bag. So there's the witness of those thoughts, but the witness of those thoughts isn't the same as the thought. The thought just kind of appears before that witnessing consciousness and then goes on. Now see, I'm talking totally non-Zen right now, so I probably shouldn't do that, but that's from looking into the Advaita tradition, which I think is kind of an interesting way of looking at these things. So that's what that means. That's what it means when I say I must control my thought. The controller is the creation of thought, so thought controls thought, and it has no meaning. That's my best attempt at explicating what that means. If you want to think about donating to me, here is a URL. That's a great transition. I surprised you, didn't I? You can send to the donations to the URL that you're seeing on the screen below. That'll take you to my Patreon or PayPal, and if you're looking on YouTube, the Patreon and PayPal links are directly below the video. That is my onlyest way of making a living, and I really appreciate your support. Even when I am working and traveling, that is my number one way of making a living, is still those donations. So right now it's the only thing I got, and hopefully in the future it won't be the only thing, but it'll still be the main thing, and I really appreciate those of you who donate. If you don't want to donate, you don't have to. This is offered for free. A donation is just something you can do, and I'm telling you where to do it if you want to do it, so please don't think you have to. Anyway, that is all. I really appreciate those of you who do donate. Have a good time all the time. See you later. Bye. Hi, Ziggy. Is it too hot outside for you? You don't want to go out? Alright. Well, you can stay in here. It's cooler in here, I think. Good boy.